Okay, great. What
Um,
is are we 1 to 1:30 or 1 to 2?
oh, we'll just talk for like 20 minutes.
Okay, great, great.
Um, Let me just show our producer. This is Arden.
Hi, how are you?
Does that look fine? Yeah. Okay. And so Michael said you're going to San Francisco tomorrow?
Tomorrow, no, tomorrow I actually have an event in New York City, and then I leave, I believe, on tour. I go to Canada and then San Francisco. So, but my tour
Oh,
starts on Wednesday.
oh, nice. And where are you going in Canada?
Just Toronto for the day.
Yeah, cool. Um, so let me ask you a basic question that you may not be able to answer.
Yeah.
Um, do you remember how the idea for rooms came to you?
I do actually. I Well, I mean, it came to me from several different sources. Actually, originally, Rooms, I kind of conceived of it as two separate novels. It took me a long time to realize that they were in fact the same novel. Um, I I was writing. I went in 2010. I went and stayed with a friend at this manor house in England. It's actually, you can look it up. It's called Gunthorpe, and it was this really big old house. And it was a party, so it was filled with all different kinds of people. And I was started, and it was filled with all these antiques and strange things. So I started kind of to have an idea at that point about a house, an old house, and a group of people, a motley collection of people who kind of return home and their dynamics. Of course, books like that have been written from time immemorial, and I didn't really understand what my perspective on it was, and who the kind of the characters of the walkers started coming to me, but I didn't really know what their story was. And simultaneously, I'm really interested in old houses. I'm interested in the functioning of memory, and I was thinking a lot about memory palaces, which are a mnemonic trick for remembering details. So I started thinking about the idea separately about rendering that kind of literal and having a house in which people's memories were really layered on top of it, and in a more physical or literal way. So I started kind of having the idea for Alice as a narrator who has taken on the house as her body. And at a certain point I realized that the two books were the same, and that I should combine them.
Yeah, because the two narratives kind of collide in a nice way in the novel as it is now. So
Yeah.
good
Well,
job.
they're really interdependent. I mean, they're independent but also interdependent. And so that's why kind of on their own as separate narrative threads, they didn't really work as whole novels, but together hopefully they do.
Yeah. So I mean, as you mentioned, like, books about houses that sort of have a life of their own, or are sort of characters, and often spooky characters. Did like, say, The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, a British
Mhm.
novel. Did you find yourself reading that stuff, or when you have an idea like this, do you have to stay away from ideas that have also treated a similar theme, or?
I mean, I think I don't consciously go out and seek and try to read books that are treating similar subjects once I've had an idea. I mean, novel writing is so strange and alchemical that you end up really pulling inspiration and drawing from such a wide, diverse variety of texts. But I mean, I've definitely read over the course of my life. There are books that tonally have influenced me. I mean, and Rooms is, there are parts of it that are kind of haunting, but parts of it that are very funny. And there are certainly a ton of books about um, the families, like the corrections that have over my life influenced me. And then there are books like Shelley Jackson's We've Always Lived in the Castle, and Henry James' The Turn of the Screw, about kind of atmospheric strangeness that exists within these houses, these places, and among a group of people. But I didn't, you don't consciously necessarily turn to those things, but those are things that just form a broad pool of knowledge from which you can draw at will. Um, so yeah, so once I'm working on something specifically, I don't go out and try to seek sources, but I do obviously make time to read every day, knowing that it will influence me ultimately.
Right. And I read once that you kind of will tend to work on two books or two ideas at once, like one kind of for fun and one that you've got to turn in. Is that still the
That is
case
true.
for
Yes,
you?
I do. I tend to work on more than one book simultaneously. Um, in part because I enjoy the I enjoy that. I enjoy passing between one and the other and always having kind of one that feels a little bit more accessible. Although I do work on both every day. And the other reason is just that like I find that writing is kind of like a drug for me, and as I get older, I need more and more of it to kind of achieve the same feeling or result. So that's why. And also, I mean, I just really love to do it. So whenever I'm whenever I've worked really well on something I've contracted, and I think like, oh, I should reward myself by doing something fun. Oh, I'll write because it's really my only hobby.
Yeah. I have to say it's really refreshing to hear that because one reason, because I used to be the literary director of the Texas Book Festival,
Hmm.
and there were plenty of cases where like we couldn't host whatever star writer because the publicist said, well, he can only write at home and only
Right.
travel. Like it just was so frustrating to me. And so to hear like somebody who's adaptable and can move
Yeah.
with different text is really.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
And I sympathize. I mean, I sympathize with that a lot. Certainly, a lot of authors are that way, and require certain space in order. But I never feel. I mean, I never. I feel as though, and I mean, I get it because writing is very hard. I mean, and you kind of don't ever really feel like doing it just because it's so hard. You really have to sit and grapple with the material. But that said, it doesn't get any easier whether I'm home or whether I'm like on the road. So just being able to do it and having to do it. I mean, at this point also too, at some point it was a discipline, but now it's just a real habit. So I don't feel good unless I'm actively working on something. I don't even feel like normal, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. So the books has been out for like a week or so. Um, how has it been publishing your first adult book?
Well, my Rooms comes out tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. Okay, great.
Yeah,
I'm
so
thinking
I
it's a
don't
pub
know.
date. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know actually how it's going to be, but so far I've been really, really pleased, knock wood, with some of the critical responses I've received, which is really always really terrifying, especially as a YA author moves into the adult space. Um, I am as curious as everybody else about how the transition will be. I mean, you really have to earn. I'm hoping, of course, that some of my audience for my YA and my younger stuff comes along to this book, but you also really have to earn and reach an entirely different audience. And that's going to be, I mean, so in that sense, it's almost like being a debut author again. And it's going to require a lot of legwork, and that's why I'm kind of touring for the rest of the fall and getting in front of a lot of people and talking about the book. So hopefully it will all yield good results, but we'll see.
Yeah. It's nice to see because usually we see people who've been successful in the adult world transitioning to YA,
Mhm.
and like we won't put this in the interview, but a lot, publicists who are handling those adult writers transitioning to YA, like say John Sanford, big bestseller in the adult world,
Mhm.
good writer. I have not read his YA book, but you often, as a journalist, sort of feel like, oh, they paid him a lot of money for that YA novel, and that person did it just to make more money because YA is so successful. So
Mhm.
it's nice to see the reverse, where you're actually trying something that isn't an assured success, and you do, as you said, you have to like
Yeah.
have this totally different audience.
Totally. Yeah, well, it's definitely
Yeah.
not assured success. Unfortunately, I mean, I think one of the great things about working with Echo is that they really believe in the book and they believe in my career and they believe in it as having some kind of longevity.
Mhm.
They know that that means that the sales and whatever the first performance are going to look closer to a normal debut author into the adult space than anything else. Um, and they're prepared for that, and that's kind of nice, I mean, that they understand that.
Yeah, they're nice and small, and they can. It seems like it feels at least like they can devote some time to each writer.
Yeah, they're great.
Um, and so, but tell me a little bit more about the writing process for this first adult one. I mean, did you find sort of different, you were writing in a different way for adults or anything
Um,
about,
I mean, I definitely wrote in a different way in some ways, although it's hard to codify because, like, it's not a conscious. I mean, you write in a different way for every book to a certain extent. I mean, there are thematic, there are choices, there are voices that carry through. There's a voice that carries through kind of the way that many of my adolescents speak, but consciously, I mean, but each book feels like its own thing. I mean, I don't know. I also tend to write books that are very, very different from one another. So they're, in different genres and they are for different age groups and they tackle very different themes. So certainly for me as an author, I really do feel as though each book has its own kind of exigencies and so I definitely wrote Rooms differently than I've written any other books, but I don't know how much of that to attribute just to the fact that it's written for adults. I mean, adults do speak differently, use different language. Several of my characters were raised at very different times, so they have different kind of patterns and modes of thinking and beliefs and morality, schemas of morality. So all of that was true, but again, it's hard to kind of assign how much of that is due to its being for adults versus just being a novel that is completely different, that has 7 narrative points of view and has past and present tense sections and all of that stuff. In terms of like the actual mechanics of writing, those were kind of the same. I mean, I wrote 10 to 15,000 words, 20,000 words to see if it was living, if it was something that was kind of rising off the page and having its own life. And then I stopped and I really thought overall about the structure of the book and how it would progress and where the conflicts would be, which was challenging, especially since I was dividing it not by chapter, but by room. So I really had to figure out and map the action really specifically before even progressing. But that's kind of something I do in all of my books because otherwise I write long books in which nothing happens. So.
that's great. Well, and all of this goes without saying that you have for your YA stuff, you presumably have adult readers. So, I mean, you've had crossover already. So.
Yeah, definitely. About 50% of my readers are adults actually, which is interesting. I mean, that's just slightly higher than most YA authors, but it's true. I mean, so many authors read YA, so many adults read YA books. Now, that doesn't mean that those adults want to also read an adult book for me. I mean, so it depends, but yeah, no, I mean, it's really going to be an interesting experiment for sure.
Yeah. And so, are there movie plans with this one? Yeah, or
the movie plans. I mean, I think that this one. I've always felt that this one would be very, very hard to turn into a movie because of its perspective. It's something that we are hanging back on. We're keeping kind of the rights and not shopping them around, and because I think that what we would need in order to really make it work would be a really fantastic director or screenwriter who could really conceptualize it in a way that none of us have been able to conceptualize it so far. So I do a lot of work in Hollywood anyway, so I kind of am making a lot of connections out there, and we're kind of keeping this in our back pocket if we meet the right person to try to develop it further.
Yeah. And don't you have a pilot or a series in the works?
I had
or
a pilot that went. Yeah, I had a pilot for my Delirium series that actually was filmed, but it didn't get picked up, sadly. I think you can find it in its entirety on YouTube. It's kind of a hoot. And I'm working on my novel Panic, has been optioned by Universal. So there's a script for that now, and we're kind of in that phase with it.
Yeah. But are you writing that script?
I'm not writing it, but I am heavily involved in giving notes and, helping giving comments on the direction of it. And they've been really, the producer and the screenwriter have been really, really wonderful about actually listening to and caring about my opinion, which does not often happen in Hollywood.
Right. And so you have a business where you and other people sort of help writers incubate ideas and develop them. I was curious if it, I mean, you're so prolific in your own writing life. Like, is it difficult to sort of separate out the work you do for them and for other writers' ideas, or how do you sort of partition all of that?
I think that writers in general are only kind of interested in like a couple different themes. There are certain ideas that allow me. Ideas come to me differently. I mean, there's the ideas that I end up doing with Paper Lantern kind of have a more cerebral quality to them. It's not that I'm looking and saying what's trending now, not at all, but there's a more exterior. This is kind of a strange thing to say, but there's almost a more exterior feeling to how they come to me. Like uh, I think in a more cognitive way, oh, that would make an interesting story. What an interesting news article. That would make a good book. Whereas the books that really I want to do, they kind of they seem to come from inside. They seem to kind of emerge from a more, integral place to my identity. So I don't usually have any confusion about what is for one company and what's for me. I mean, the other way of also explaining it is that, like, when I have an idea of a book that I want to write, it will typically begin to start writing itself in my head. There will be a narrator that attaches him or herself to the idea. Whereas when I just have ideas, they are just ideas. It's, the character comes later. I have to kind of think about wants and needs in a way that I don't have to with my book, which is kind of instinctive. My books are kind of instinctive. Was one notable case though where another idea from another one of our editors kind of got kicked around, and I started building on it, and then I kind of fell in love with it, wanted to write it. So that has happened, but in general, no. I mean, as I said, I mean, I really love. Sometimes it's overwhelming in terms of the quantity of work, but I really love books and I love stories. So even when I'm overwhelmed, when I have an idea, I get so fiery and passionate about it and excited about it, and I want to see it made, and I want to get the best writer I can and work with them. I mean, it's really the deepest kind of passion of my life. So it's just one other arena in which I can explore that. Oh no, we froze. Hello. Hello.
Hi, Lauren. It's Arden. I'm here with Clay.
Hi. I don't know what happened.
Sometimes it was something with our network, but he's actually going to invite you to a new hangout. So,
Okay.
I just wanted you to look out for that invite. He's got just a few more questions.
So how do I look out for the invite? Sorry.
Have